Overall satisfaction with the cleanliness of our public spaces, but not so much for coffee shops, hawker centres and markets. We're joined now by one of the lead authors of that survey, Professor Paulin Straughan from Singapore Management University. Professor Straughan, the pain point here, hawker centres, coffee shops, especially their toilets. I mean, are expectations just, sort of higher now? What's changed in these spaces that's led to this drop in satisfaction?
Thank you for having me, Don and Steve. I think that it's important to note that while the dip happened when we compare to the 2019 results, but if you look at 2018 and 2017, it's still higher, right, than the pre-pandemic days. So I think the reason why this year's findings are a little bit harsher, probably due to two factors. We have now a heightened awareness of what we expect, our public spaces to be in terms of cleanliness and hygiene standards. And also the pandemic, these are pandemic times, right? So there are constraints in manpower in the cleaning industry. So there's a frequent rotation of cleaning teams, perhaps, lack of training. So these probably, contributed to why the percentage points dropped slightly, right? Then again, the pain points of wet markets, hawker centres and coffee shops is not at all surprising because these are important community spaces which provide essential services to the residents. And there's also very high footfall. So therefore, and also further to keep prices reasonable, I imagine that the quality of cleaning services engaged in these community spaces might be quite different from those we find at high-end shopping malls, for example, and F&B spaces. So therefore, the critical question at the end of this is, how do we improve on the cleanliness in these, very important community spaces without incurring higher costs?
And talk to us a bit about, or elaborate if you could, about how the pandemic may have changed the views on public cleanliness and perhaps also the need for public cleanliness to then be enhanced.
I think that with the pandemic, right, and particularly it's centered on an infectious disease, we are now acutely aware of how easy it is for a virus to spread. And so as a result, in all Singapore, all of us are more concerned about public hygiene, cleanliness, and how to better protect ourselves and our loved ones. But the tricky part about public hygiene is that we are dealing with outcomes that are not necessarily visible, right? How do you know that a place has been sufficiently sterilized and so forth? So I think the lack of clarity in that area probably makes us a lot more nervous and, focused, when we see, that, specks of dust and dirt and so forth, makes us, a lot more concerned, right, about whether or not, these spaces are safe for us. So we do see from the outcomes, from the results from this round of survey that there is a lot more attention focused on what government's role should be. Right, the 73%, up from 58% from last year, asked that the government should take more responsibility to keep Singapore clean. This is not surprising as we are living in a pandemic, and many of us feel that we need a strong authority presence to drive public hygiene and cleanliness as we strive to keep Singapore a clean and safe space. Interestingly, though, while we see that vast majority articulate that we or residents should be responsible for cleanliness in our neighborhoods, sadly, this doesn't quite translate into action. So moving forward, I think we should further exploit this to leverage a strong perception that there's collective responsibility in keeping and stake ownership in keeping our neighborhood spaces clean and plan out, actionable pathways for this goodwill to translate to a community effort, rise up, to the challenges that we face. Because what pandemic did for us is help us realize that we rely on an army of cleaners to keep Singapore clean. And, when we had lockdowns and dormitories were shut down and there was a shortage of manpower, particularly foreign, workers who were, partnering us in a cleaning endeavor, it made us realize how vulnerable we were, and that perhaps a reliance on an army of cleaners to keep our public spaces clean is not sustainable, right? So therefore, the results this year showed that a lot more Singaporeans are saying, this is our responsibility. We should do something about it. And the question is, what do we do, right? So I think it's an important, there's a important opportunity here for us to try to bring the community on board and then leverage, the awareness that the pandemic has raised in all of us.
Yes, because collective responsibility must translate into, sort of positive actions, Professor Straughan. But you've been doing this survey for some years now. Are there any trends in the mindsets across different age groups that you've seen and profiles of people?
Well, we have not had a chance to go deeper into the surveys, but what we do see in terms of trends, right, is if I may vary from your question a little bit, what we found exciting is that the notion of cleanliness and dirt, right? They're social constructs, right? And they take on different meanings, and pain points shift depending on environmental conditions. So an interesting observation is some years ago in 2011, when we did the first sociological study on littering, the pain point there was Singaporeans seem to be confused, what constitutes litter, right? If I pile up my litter in a corner, is it really littering? I mean, I was neat about it, right? So NEA stepped up, very much in their public communications. If you don't bin it, it's litter. So therefore, let's bin it. So you see now that this year's survey, for example, we have an overwhelming majority who report that they do not litter, right? Compared to 60%, in 2011, now we have close to 80-90%. Now, this season's pain point is tray return, right? We've been talking about that for the past few years. We can't understand what is it that Singaporeans just don't pick up that tray, and clean up after themselves in hawker centers and food courts and coffee shops. And so the response from our surveys was that the ambiguity, right? Whose responsibility is it? Is it really my responsibility, or is it the responsibility of this, of the cleaners? And so because there is ambiguity, because there are gray areas, then sadly, I think it allowed, many of us to make excuses for ourselves, right? For non-action. Now that's going to change now, right? This survey was done closed in April, May, before the announcement that tray return is now mandatory. So come next round of this study, we would expect that there will be a lot less ambiguity in this area.
Yes, you certainly probably will see more changes now that tray return has to sort of happen. Professor Straughan, thank you very much for shedding light on the survey for us. Professor Paulin Straughan there from the Singapore Management University.